Good morning, folks. I'm Joshua Gans, economics professor here at Melbourne Business School. About 10 years ago, I was involved in a project to adapt a textbook that had been quite successful in the US for Australia. And it was this one, Principles of Microeconomics or Principles of Economics by Greg Mankiw. And it was an interesting process, and it's led to thousands and thousands of students knowing my name, which is quite an interesting effect as well. More recently, I've written another book. That book is coming out in August, and it's called Parentonomics. And it's a very different book. For starters, it's not trying to educate undergraduates or economics students. Actually, I'm not really sure who it's trying to educate. But it's a story of how an economist would deal with parenting. So those are my two current books. I thought for this talk I'd combine them and see what lessons can be drawn from both of them. You know, you might think that would give rise to a title for this talk such as this, Principles of Parentonomics. But actually I want to do something a bit more challenging. I think it's a bit more interesting if I talk about economics lessons that you can draw from parenting examples. Now the challenge of this is the following, because I want to have a bit of a risk element. Can I actually do this? Is to take the textbook that we have has 10 lessons of economics in it. And each is illustrated through the normal sorts of examples. I wondered if I could take the 10 lessons of economics and explain them using only examples related to parenting. And so that's what this talk is. I may not pull it off, we'll see. Okay, so let's start. Lesson number 1 from that textbook is people face trade-offs. What this is basically saying is that whenever you do something, there is often something else that you cannot do. And so you have to consider what those choices are and the costs of benefits of them. You have to trade them off to decide what to do. Now this is an easy one for parents. Parents are doing this all the time. So the moment you get a baby home, and your number 1 priority with a baby, I guess, is health. But number 2 is sleep. And so from the moment you get a baby home, you are trying to work out a routine by which the baby will sleep. You're doing this when you need sleep a lot because you're sleep deprived. And so what do? Well, the sorts of trade-offs that people come up with in that sort of environment is very simple. The easiest thing to do with a baby that's awake is to rock it to sleep, or some parents bring babies into their bed with them. The problem with that is that when the baby grows up a little bit, they tend to like those things anyway. In fact, that gives them a reason not to sleep. And so you immediately face a trade-off as a parent between doing those activities which get you an immediate result and maybe sleep quicker, versus having to do that all the time. So you have a trade-off, but if you find that you want your baby to find another way of getting to sleep that does not involve you, because then you'll be doing it every 2 hours at night. And so you face this trade-off basically between the getting your baby to sleep now and quickly versus investing in getting them to sleep into the future. And so you have to make that trade-off between the present and the future right now. And so that's an example of a trade-off that parents face and have to deal with. Lesson number 2. The cost of something is what you give up to get it. This actually seems like a funny way to talk about cost, and this is the first thing that any economics textbook says, is normally we think of costs in terms of monetary terms. But that's just the thing you're giving up to get whatever you want is dollars. But actually one of the first lessons of economics is, of course, costs are more than money. Costs involve things that you can no longer do, achieve, or what have you, in order to do something else. Now, one of these things is option value. If I, for instance, if I choose to, if someone other than myself decided to stop breastfeeding, that might be an issue right now, but it also is an issue into the future because you don't have the option to start breastfeeding again. So you have to think about that in that equation. And our children are actually quite good at working out these trade-offs too. So let me give you a story. So my eldest daughter is her father's child, is an economist in her heart and in her head. So she tends to naturally think in economic terms. She's also very athletic. She enjoys and very competitive in sports. So, for instance, she has been dragged and then drags us to swimming lessons for many years. And one of the things the swim school has is a race night. And of course, being the 21st century, a race night is not couched in terms of racing against other kids. It's couched in terms of racing against yourself. So the goal of race night is you get timed of how long it takes you to do a 50-metre breaststroke or backstroke or what have you. And then in a couple more months, there's another race night at which you get timed again. And if you beat your previous time, you get a personal best, or PB, as the Olympians call it. Then you get a ribbon. You get a reward from the swim school. Anyway, so I went to the first of these race nights. And the first of the race nights, you're going to get a ribbon anyway. Because basically there's no other time to benchmark it off. And I watched my daughter, and she was swimming really quite slowly. And I thought, oh, well, you know, maybe it's late and she has a cold. Except they would swim down to one end of the pool, and then they would wade back up to do another stroke and then have another time. Well, she was swimming down slowly and then wading up full of energy, bouncing along. Which, you know, and I normally thought, you know, if she's tired, why isn't she conserving her energy? So she came out of the pool and I said, well, how did you think about all that? You seemed a bit slow. And I thought it was good. She said, I thought it was good. I said, but, you know, I think you can go faster than that. She said, well, yes, of course I can go faster than that. But if I do that now, then I'll have a faster time to beat next time to get a personal best and a ribbon. So what she was doing, she was holding back, knowing that if she did too much now, she would fall into the trap of making life hard for herself later on. Suffice it to say, we haven't done any more race nights since that point. She is good for thinking about that before falling into the first trap that all the other kids have apparently fallen into. Okay, so the cost of something is what you give up to get it, and you sometimes have to think very elaborately in order to get to the right answer. Number 3, rational people think at the margin. This is a very economics lesson. One of the things about choice is working out what the set of choices that you make is. For instance, and this is going to be an example about parents being rational. If I told you I would give you $3,000 in cash to have a child, for most people, $3,000 in cash isn't going to tip the bucket in that decision. The estimates are somewhere from $250,000 to maybe $500,000 that it actually costs you to have a child. What difference does $3,000 make? But it can influence some things. So when the Treasurer, Peter Costello, back in 2004, announced that the Australian government was going to pay parents $3,000 upon production of a baby, you might have thought, well, what effect could this possibly have? It's probably a handout. When he announced it was in the May budget, and it was going to start on the 1st of July. I must admit, I was sitting there listening to that May budget, and I thought, oh, this is an interesting policy, because we were pregnant with child number 3 of ours at the time. And I realised, oh, she's due in July, and by the time you get around to the 3rd child, you don't know exactly when they're due. And I thought it might have been early July. I was a bit worried.